The slave market opened before sunrise, as it always did, because suffering did not need daylight to exist. Lanterns hung from wooden posts, casting uneven yellow light across the dirt ground. The smell of sweat, old wood, fear, and damp iron blended into something unmistakable, something every person there recognized but never named. Men gathered in groups, coats pulled tight against the morning chill, hands heavy with coins, eyes trained not on faces but on bodies, strength, posture, and silence. This was not a place where names mattered. The farmer arrived early, his boots clean, his coat well pressed. He was known in the region, not because he was kind, but because he was successful. His land stretched wide, his crops sold well, and his household stood as proof of discipline and control. He had bought enslaved people before, many times. To him, this market was routine, almost dull. He expected nothing more than another transaction, another addition to his labor force. He did not know that this morning would be different. As the first groups were brought forward, the farmer watched with detached interest. Strong men were inspected like animals, teeth checked, backs slapped, hands forced open to prove there were no tremors. Women were evaluated with quieter cruelty, eyes lowered, movements judged, youth silently priced higher than experience. Children stood confused, clinging to one another, already learning that fear could be inherited. The farmer had learned long ago not to look too closely. Distance made things easier. Then she was brought forward. There was no announcement, no dramatic gesture, yet the crowd shifted the moment she stepped into view. Conversations faded. Even the auctioneer paused for half a breath longer than usual. She stood straight, despite the chain at her wrist, despite the weight of countless eyes. Her face was calm, not blank, but controlled. There was something deliberate in the way she held herself, as if she refused to let the market decide what she was worth. The farmer felt it immediately, a tension, not desire in the way men usually felt it, but something sharper, something tied to ownership and pride. He had never seen an enslaved woman who carried herself like that. Beauty alone was not rare, but this was different. It was dignity, quiet and unyielding, standing in a place built to erase it. Whispers moved through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Men asserted opinions they did not need to say aloud. The bids started lower than expected, hesitant, cautious. Some buyers avoided eye contact with her entirely, sensing something unsettling they could not explain. Others stared too openly, curiosity mixing with unease. The farmer watched them all, feeling a strange satisfaction build inside him. When he placed his first bid, it was deliberate, confident, higher than necessary, a signal. The bidding escalated quickly after that. Pride entered the room. No one wanted to lose. Not to her, not to him. Coins changed hands, voices rose, the auctioneer's rhythm sharpened. The farmer felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. This was not just a purchase, it was a victory. Each higher bid reinforced the idea that he was winning something rare, something others wanted but could not have. Throughout it all, she said nothing. Her eyes did not dart or plead. They rested somewhere distant, beyond the crowd, beyond the market itself. That silence unsettled him more than resistance ever could. Still, he pushed the feeling aside. He had paid enough money to believe he was in control. When the final bid was called and the gavel struck, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads, others smirked, already imagining rumors spreading through the county. The farmer signed the papers without hesitation. He barely noticed the clerk's expression, something between pity and warning. As she was handed over, their eyes met briefly. There was no hatred there, no fear, just awareness. The farmer felt an unexpected tightening in his chest, a momentary discomfort he could not explain. He turned away quickly, annoyed at himself for noticing. The journey back to his plantation took hours. The wagon creaked along dirt roads bordered by fields and bare trees. The farmer rode ahead on horseback, posture straight, chin lifted. Behind him, she sat silently among supplies and chains, watching the land pass as if memorizing it. He told himself this was good business. Strong, young, valuable. Her beauty would elevate his status. Others would notice. They always did. As the plantation came into view, workers paused in their tasks. Eyes followed the wagon. Whispers began immediately. The farmer noticed, and instead of concern, he felt pride. Let them look, he thought. Let them see what he had acquired. Ownership had always been his language. She was brought inside, assigned quarters, given instructions. She listened without comment. When spoken to, she responded only when necessary, her voice calm, her words measured. There was no trembling, no visible panic. That composure made him uncomfortable. He preferred submission that looked like submission. That evening, as supper was served, the farmer found his appetite strangely diminished. His wife noticed his distraction. She asked questions, casual ones at first, but her eyes were sharp. She had heard the whispers. She had seen the looks from the workers. The farmer answered vaguely, dismissively. He did not like feeling questioned in his own home. Later, alone in his study, he poured himself a drink and sat by the fire. The house was quiet, yet he could not relax. His thoughts returned again and again to the market, to her stillness, to the way the room had changed when she appeared. He told himself this was foolish. He had made countless purchases before. Why should this one linger? When sleep finally came, it was shallow and restless. His dreams were fragmented. Faces without mouths, eyes watching from the dark, the sound of chains dragging across wooden floors. He woke before dawn, heart racing, the fire reduced to embers. For the first time in years, he felt something close to unease. Outside, the plantation stirred awake. Morning always brought order. He dressed, determined to reclaim his sense of control. But as the sun rose and he stepped into the day, that tightness returned. Something had shifted, though nothing obvious had changed. He did not yet know it, but the regret had already begun, quietly, invisibly, growing in the space between pride and conscience, waiting for the moment it would no longer be ignored. Morning arrived without comfort. The sun rose as it always did, pale and slow over the fields, but the farmer felt no sense of routine. He stood by the window longer than usual, watching the workers move into position, listening to the distant sounds of labor beginning. Normally, this hour grounded him. Order reassured him. Today it felt thin, as though something fragile held the day together. He noticed it first in the silence, not the quiet of obedience, but the kind that carries awareness. The plantation seemed to be watching him back. When he stepped outside, conversation stopped too quickly, eyes lowered. He told himself this was respect, yet it felt diff. Rent, charged, uneasy. News traveled fast on plantations, faster than owners liked to believe. By now, everyone had heard about the purchase. Everyone had opinions, even if they dared not voice them. He ordered that the woman be brought out for inspection. It was a habit, a way to remind himself of authority. When she appeared, the same unsettling calm surrounded her. She moved with purpose, not haste, not hesitation. Her gaze did not challenge him, yet it did not shrink either. It remained steady, controlled, as if she had decided long ago that fear would not save her. The farmer spoke, listing tasks, expectations, rules. She acknowledged them simply. No protest, no confusion. That should have satisfied. Instead, irritation crept in. Submission without visible fear felt incomplete, almost insulting, though he could not have explained why. As the day unfolded, he noticed how others reacted to her presence. Overseers lingered longer than necessary. Workers glanced in her direction, then away, as if warned by instinct. His wife watched from the porch, her expression unreadable. He caught her staring once, just once, and in that look was something sharp, something calculating. By midday, rumors reached him through indirect words and careful tones. A visiting neighbor mentioned her name in passing, then corrected himself, as if names still mattered here. Another hinted that the woman had been sold before, that her past was not simple. Someone else mentioned trouble, vaguely, cautiously, trouble that followed her from plantation to plantation. The farmer felt irritation harden into something colder. He disliked surprises. He prided himself on knowing the value and history of what he bought. He summoned one of the older workers, someone who had learned how to speak without revealing too much. Carefully, indirectly, he asked questions. The answers came slowly, rapt, uncertainty. The woman had once belonged to a household where boundaries had been crossed and consequences followed. There had been arguments, whispers, a sudden sale. Some said she was unlucky, others said she refused to break in the ways expected of her. No one claimed certainty. Fear blurred facts. That afternoon the farmer rode into town, telling himself it was for business. In truth, he needed reassurance. He sought out the trader who had sold her, a man known for knowing more than he admitted. At first the trader smiled easily, dismissing concerns, but when pressed, his tone shifted. "She brings attention," the man said carefully. "That's all. Attention." The word settled heavily between them. The farmer returned home unsettled. Attention meant questions. Questions led to scrutiny. In his world, scrutiny was dangerous. His status depended on the appearance of control, on the belief that his household was orderly, unquestioned, respectable. Anything that disrupted that image threatened more than comfort. It threatened power. By evening, tension had seeped into every corner of the house. His wife spoke little during supper. When she did, her words were precise, edged with implication. She asked about the woman's duties, where she slept, who supervised her. The farmer answered curtly, annoyed by the interrogation. Yet beneath that annoyance lay something else, fear that he could not quite name. That night, the house did not feel like his own. Footsteps echoed strangely. Shadows stretched too long across the walls. He listened for sounds that never came, then startled at the smallest noise. When he finally slept, his dreams were worse than the night before. Crowds staring silently, doors closing without his permission, his voice failing when he tried to command. He woke before dawn again, sweat cold on his skin. The next day brought escalation. A letter arrived, unexpected, unwelcome, bearing the seal of a family whose influence reached farther than his own. It referenced the woman obliquely, politely, but the meaning was clear. Her sale was being watched, her transfer noted. There were questions about legality, about agreements made and broken. The farmer's hands trembled as he folded the paper. This was no longer a private matter. This was risk. He considered his options. Selling her quickly might solve the problem, but buyers would ask why. Sending her away without explanation would draw even more attention. Keeping her meant living under scrutiny, with his household already strained and whispers growing louder. When he saw her again that afternoon, something had shifted in him. He no longer saw beauty first. He saw consequence. He saw the unraveling of a certainty he had relied on his entire life. She met his gaze briefly, then looked away, not in submission but in finality, as though she already understood what he was only beginning to grasp. For the first time since the market, fear outweighed pride. The farmer realized then that his regret was not coming. It was already there, settled deeply, spreading quietly through every decision he made. And the day was not yet over. By the third morning, the farmer no longer pretended that things would return to normal. The sense of control he had spent his life building felt fragile now, like a structure held together by habit rather than strength. He woke before dawn again, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around him. Even the familiar creaks of wood unsettled him. The plantation, once an extension of his will, now felt foreign. Outside, the day began as it always did, yet nothing felt the same. Workers moved more quietly than usual, eyes lowered but alert. He noticed small things he had never cared to see before, how people paused when he passed how conversations ended not with obedience, but calculation. Authority, he realized, depended on belief, and belief was slipping. He summoned the woman once more, not out of routine this time, but necessity. When she entered the room, the air seemed to shift, as though her presence carried weight beyond her body. She stood waiting, hands still, eyes calm. There was no fear in her posture, no pleading. That composure unsettled him more deeply than defiance ever could. He questioned her indirectly, carefully choosing his words. He asked about her previous households, her work, her movements. She answered simply, without elaboration, revealing nothing he could use to reassure himself. Each response closed a door instead of opening one. He realized then that knowledge, which had always empowered him, failed here. He could not command understanding from her. His frustration grew, but it had nowhere to land. Anger would not restore order. Threats would only confirm the rumors already circling him. For the first time, he sensed how limited his power truly was, how dependent it was on silence and compliance rather than absolute control. That afternoon, more visitors arrived unannounced. Neighbors, distant relations, men who usually announced themselves days in advance. They came under the guise of courtesy, yet their questions lingered too long, their glances strayed too freely. Each interaction left the farmer feeling exposed. He smiled, performed hospitality, and lied smoothly, but exhaustion crept into his voice. His wife grew colder. Where once there had been routine tension, now there was something sharper, accusation without words. She watched him constantly, measuring his responses, searching for weakness. She did not confront him directly, but the distance between them widened with every passing hour. He knew she feared scandal more than anything. Reputation was her armor, and now it was cracked. That evening another letter arrived. This one carried no politeness. It was brief, firm, unmistakable. There would be inquiries, records would be reviewed, transactions examined. The farmer felt the ground shift beneath him. This was no longer a matter of gossip, it was a reckoning. He paced his study long into the night, weighing choices that offered no safety. To keep her meant prolonged scrutiny. To sell her meant admitting doubt. To send her away risked retaliation. Every path led to loss. He poured drink after drink, yet sobriety haunted him regardless. Regret, he realized, was not loud. It did not announce itself. It settled quietly, growing heavier with every thought. At some point, his pacing brought him near her quarters. He stopped himself, startled by his own impulse. What would he say? What could he demand now? The truth unsettled him. She no longer represented possession. She represented consequence, the very thing he had believed himself immune to. The next morning, word spread faster than he could contain it. Overseers reported questions from town, clerks requested documents, buyers who once sought his favor now kept their distance. His name, once spoken with certainty, now carried hesitation. He felt the weight of years unravel in days. He avoided her, then sought her out again, trapped between denial and inevitability. When he finally saw her working among others, he noticed something he had refused to acknowledge before. She was not isolated. Others listened to her quietly. They watched her with something like respect, not admiration, not defiance, recognition. She reminded them of something unspoken, that endurance itself could be power. That realization frightened him more than any letter or rumor. Control relied on the belief that resistance was futile. Her presence disrupted that belief simply by existing. Decision, when it came, felt less like choice and more like surrender. Arrangements were made discreetly, hurriedly. The farmer framed it as necessity, as strategy, as protection of his household. Yet none of those words eased the truth. He had failed to foresee the cost of his arrogance. On the day she was to be sent away, the plantation gathered unconsciously, drawn by the gravity of the moment. The farmer stood apart, watching from a distance, his authority reduced to observation. She did not look back as she left. There was no triumph in her expression, no bitterness, only resolve. As the wagon disappeared down the road, an unexpected emptiness settled over him. He had expected relief. Instead, there was only loss, of certainty, of pride, of the illusion that power protected him from consequence. Life resumed its rhythm slowly. Crops grew, work continued, visitors stopped coming, yet something essential had changed. The farmer found himself more cautious, more watchful, less convinced of his own invulnerability. The plantation obeyed, but the obedience felt thinner now, conditional. At night, he still dreamed of the market, of the moment he raised his hand to bid, of the silence that followed. He understood now that regret was not about the woman herself, nor the money spent. It was about the mirror she had held up without effort. She had forced him to see the limits of ownership, the fragility of dominance, and the cost of believing himself untouchable. He never spoke of her again, not by name, not by reference. Silence became his refuge, but silence could not erase memory. In the end, the farmer learned what he had never expected to learn from a single purchase, that some acts leave marks not on land or ledger, but on the mind, and those marks, once made, do not fade.